Hi everyone, this is Mr. Zhang, and today we'll be going over the math homework for Class P. This is for session U20. For number 16, the question says, what is the largest possible value of y that would solve the equation above? So here you can see that you have two fractions, and when you have two fractions, you can cross multiply, because this is a proportion. That will give you y squared is equal to 27 times 3, which is equal to 81. So to solve for y, you can actually do the square root of both sides, but y could be equal to positive or negative 9. So the biggest possible value for y that would solve this equation would be y equals positive 9. Now you can also check your work by substituting back in y equals 9. 9 over 27 would be equal to 3 over 9. So everything does check out. They're both equal to 1/3. Next, for number 17, for all numbers C and D, let this diamond symbol be defined by the following equation. So C diamond D is equal to D squared plus CD minus C. If 3 diamond G is equal to 25, what's the positive value of G? So this is your function notation. And a function is just an input-output machine. So for this input-output machine, you have two inputs, C and D, and you have to follow this rule. So you have to take D, the second number, square it, add the product of C and D, and then you subtract the first number. So all you have to do is substitute in with 3 and G. So everywhere you see C, you'll replace it with the number 3. Everywhere you see the letter D, you'll replace it with the variable G. So 3 symbol G would be equal to D squared or G squared plus C times D, which is 3 times G. And you're subtracting the first number, which is 3. And this is equal to 25. So here, this is your quadratic that you need to solve. And to solve a quadratic, you need to set the equation equal to 0 by moving everything to one side. And then step 2 is to factor. And once you factor, you'll have to use the 0 property. Not to solve, because you can have more than one value for the variable G in this case. So to solve for G, you need to subtract 25 on both sides to move everything to the left. So that will give you G squared plus 3G minus 28 is equal to 0. And from here, you need to factor and look for factors of 28. That's 1, 28, 2, 14, and 4 and 7. And you have one of these pairs that adds or subtracts a positive 3. And that's the 4 and the 7. Specifically, it's the negative 4 and positive 7. So that's going to be G minus 4 and G plus 7. You can double check your work by foiling. You'll have G squared plus 7G minus 4G minus 28, and that should be equal to the original when you check. And that's exactly what a G squared plus 3G minus 28. So everything does check out. And then you use the 0 property, because either G minus 4 is equal to 0 or G plus 7 is equal to 0, because you have a product of two numbers, so one of them has to be equal to 0. So that gives you 4 for positive G or negative 7 for G. Specifically with the positive value, so that would be G equals 4. So for this question, you have to use a function notation, and then you come up with a quadratic, and you have to set equal to 0, factor, and use the 0 property to solve this quadratic. Next, for number 18, a list of numbers has been arranged such that each number in the list is 8 less than the number that precedes it. If 105 is the 9th number, what's the 4th number? So the pattern here is 8 less, or subtract. So this is called an arithmetic sequence. And in an arithmetic sequence, you add or subtract to get to next number. So here, there aren't that many numbers. So this is the 9th number, and this is the 4th number. So the 9th number is 105. And normally you subtract 8, but since we're working backwards, you'll have to add 8. So you want to add 8 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So when you add 8 5 times, you're really adding 40. So that would be equal to 145. Next, for number 19, 2 identical humidifiers vaporize water at exactly the same uniform rate. Each humidifier has been filled to its maximum capacity, and it takes exactly 8 hours for each humidifier to completely vaporize a tank of water. The first humidifier is turned on at exactly 6 p.m., and the second is turned on 1 hour later. How many hours will it take before the water remaining in the second tank is twice the water remaining in the first tank? So here, each time you turn on they are exactly the same humidifiers, and it stores the same amount of water. So it takes 8 hours to completely vaporize. So that is your rate. Another word for rate is just speed. So the speed in both of these cases is 8 hours for one tank. That means that in each hour, you have 1/8 of the tank is used. Now they're turned on 1 hour apart, so you can kind of make a chart. And in this chart, you're just testing out how many hours it will take to completely vaporize. So you have tank A versus tank B. So tank A turns on first, it's 8 out of 8 filled, and then it's 7 out of 8. After 1 hour, tank B turns on, that's 8 out of 8. And they have 6 out of 8 versus 7 out of 8. And you can kind of see the pattern. You have 5, and then 4, then 3 with 4, then 2 with 3, and then finally 1 and 2. So after the 7th hour, so 7 hours later, tank A will have 1/8 left, whereas tank B will have 2/8 left. So this would be 7 hours. Next, for number 20, the price of a compact disc player was reduced from $200 to $147.59. What was the percent decrease in the price of the unit? So percent decrease, there's a formula for percent change. And the formula is new minus old divided by old times 100%. So that's a formula they have to use. It's the percent change formula. So you're going to have to do 147.59, subtract 200, divided by 200, and you have to multiply this by 100%. So when you subtract 200 minus 147.59, you'll get 52.41. Negative 52.41 divided by 200 times 100%. So when you divide this number by 200, and then times 100%, you get 26.205%. So here you have to use a formula, new minus old divided by old times 100%. Next Next for number 21, square A has the side of square root of 6, and square B has the side of 6. How much greater is the area of square B than the area of square A? So the area for a square is going to be side squared. So you have two squares. The bigger area, square B, is going to be 6 squared, or 36. For square A, it's just root 6. So the area for square A is root 6 squared, which is just equal to 6. So we see that 36 is 6 times the area. So the answer is 6. Well, actually here it's 6 times greater. But if you look at the question, how much greater is the area? That's just a subtraction question, actually. So I have to do 36 minus 6, which is equal to 30. You would divide only if it's how many times greater, but it doesn't say any times. So it just says how much greater. That means it's a subtraction question. So you just do 36 minus 6. So it's 30 units of area greater. Next for number 22, in a triangle ABC, AB is 6, AC is 9.2, and a BC is an integer. What's the smallest possible perimeter of the triangle? So this is a triangle inequality question. So we have the three sides of the triangle, ABC. If you add up the two sides, it has to be greater than the third side. So here you have a triangle where side is 6 and 9.2, the last side is x. So you know that 6 plus 9.2 is greater than x, as well as 6 plus x has to be greater than 9.2. So you can solve both of these inequalities. For the first inequality, 6 plus 9.2 is 15.2, so x must be less than that. And for the second inequality, we subtract 6 from both sides. You get that x has to be greater than 3.2. So x is anything in between 3.2 and 15.2. So you want the smallest possible integer. That means you want the smallest value for x, which will just be 4, because it has to be a whole number. Now, if x is 4, the three sides will be 6, 9.2, and 4. So the perimeter is going to be 19.2. When you add everything together. So for number 22, the key is to solve using the triangle inequality theorem. If you add two sides of a triangle, it must be bigger than the third side. Next for number 23, I have a bus driving at an average speed of 55 miles per hour. It takes the basketball team to a game in 4 hours. Now, because of snowy weather conditions, the following same route home, the bus must average 40 miles an hour. So how many minutes more will the return trip take than the original trip? So here you drive 55 miles per hour in 4 hours. So you have the rate, you have the time. So the formula is distance equals rate times time. In this case, it's going to be 55 times 4, which is equal to 220. So it's 220 miles away. Now, when you return, the distance is 220 miles, and now the rate is decreased to 40 miles an hour. So the time is going to be distance over rate. So that's going to be 220 divided by 40. And here miles will cancel out. The units will be in hours because the denominator of the denominator becomes the numerator. And you have 22 divided by 4, which is 5.5. Or 5.5 hours. So going from 4 hours to 5.5 hours, that's a 1.5 hour difference. And here, because you want minutes, that's going to be 1.5 times 60, which is 90 minutes. So So the formula here is D equals RT. You have to do this 2 times. And you rearrange it to find the time. Next, remember 24. What would 20% of 3x be if 60% of x were 15? So you start with the second equation. 60% of x means 60% of x is equal to 15. 60% is rewritten as 3/5. So 3/5 times x is equal to 15. Here you can solve for x by multiplying both sides by the reciprocal, 5/3. And that will give you x to be equal to 5 times 5, or 25. Now, if x is equal to 25, 3x would be 75. So then you'll want to find 20% of 75. And 20% is 1/5. And 1/5 times 75 is 15. So here you have to use the keyword, which is of, and of means multiply. Next, for number 15, the product of 7 and n is 11 more than m. If n is equal to 6, what's the value of m? So you know n is equal to 6, substitute in. That means that product, which means 7 times n, is 11 more than or plus m. So here, n is equal to 6. So that's 7 times 6, which is 42, is equal to 11 plus m. Subtract 11 on both sides, and you get that 31 is equal to m. And here's the summary for this page. Next, for number 1, the fraction 2/9 is equal to all the following except 4. So for the first one, you can divide by 2, and get 2/9. Here, if you divide by 3, you get 2/9. For choice C, you can't divide by anything, so that's probably your answer. In D, if you divide by 5, and get 2/9. And in E, if you divide by 6, you get 2/9. So the answer is C. Next, for question number 2, in the figure shown, what's the value of x? So you have these 2 angles, and these 2 angles, they form a 180 degree straight line. So these 2 angles are called supplementary, which means they add up to 180 degrees. So that means that 30 plus x plus 60 has to be equal to 180 degrees. And here when you combine the 30 and the 60, these 2 like terms, you have x plus 90 equals 180. And when you subtract 90 from both sides, you get that x is equal to 90 degrees. So that's choice D. So here you have to know supplementary, 180 degrees, and that's a straight line. Next, for question number 3, if 2 squared plus 2 to the a power plus 2 to the 4th divided by 2 to the 5th is 21/32, then a is equal to. So here in the numerator, you know that 2 squared is equal to 4, and 2 to the 4th is equal to 16. So that means that 4 plus 2 to the a plus 16 is equal to 21. So from here, if you add the 4 and the 16, that's 20 plus 2 raised to the a power is equal to 21. Subtract 20 on both sides. You get 2 to the a is equal to 1, and a must be 0 because anything to the 0 power is equal to 1. So b raised to the 0 is equal to 1. That's sort of the identity rule for exponents. Next, for number 4, after Mr. Samuels deposits $70 into his checking account, the amount in his account will be equal to 3 times his initial deposit of $180. Immediately prior to making a $70 deposit, what was the amount of money in the checking account? So you don't know how much money he has, so we can call that X. Now, if he makes $70 So X plus $70 into his account. That's going to be 3 times the initial deposit of $180. So that means that X plus 70 has to be equal to 3 times 180, which is equal to 540. So if you subtract 70 from both sides, you get that X is equal to $470, which is choice D. Next, for number 5, if P has a value of negative 12, which set of the expressions below has the least value? So you need to substitute in negative 12 in all the choices. This would be negative 12 over 3 minus 3, which is negative 4 minus 3, which is negative 7. Choice C would be 3 over negative 12, which is negative 1/4. So that's not as negative as choice A. In choice E, you have 3 minus negative 12, which turns to be 3 plus 12, which is 15. So that's the most positive so far. Choice B would be negative 12 over 3, which would be negative 4, which is still not as small as negative 7. And in choice D, you have negative 12 minus 3, which is going to negative 15. And this is the most negative. So the answer is choice D. So for 5, you just substitute in and solve. Remember, the least value means the most negative. So for the most negative, that would mean the biggest absolute value, or the number that is the furthest away from 0 on the left side. So this is the summary for this page. Next, for number 6, 2 train stations have 1,200 miles of track between them. One train travels at 90 miles an hour, and the other travels at 70 miles per hour. And then the 2 trains start at the same time. How many hours will it take until they meet? So here, these 2 trains are towards each other, and the distance between them will be 1,200 miles. And they'll meet up at some point here. Now, because you have a rate R, and you have some distance D, and they start at the same time, which is T, you'll use the formula distance equals rate times time. So the distance that train A travels will be D equals 90 times T. For train B, you have the distance will be 70 times T, because it only travels 70 miles an hour. Now, when you take the distance that A travels plus the distance that B travels, you add them together, you'll get the total, which is 1,200. So 1,200 miles will be 90T plus 70T. This is, again, the distance that A travels, and 70T is the distance that train B travels. So when you combine like terms, 90T plus 70T is 150T. And if you divide by 150 on both sides, the time would be 120 divided by 15. And here you can divide both sides by, divide the numerator and denominator by 5. Actually, let me go back. Uh, 90T plus 70T is 160T. So if you divide both sides by 160, you have 120 divided by 16. And if you divide the numerator and the denominator by 4, you get 30 over 4, which is 15 over 2, which is 7.5. So that choice is actually here. So the answer will be choice B. They'll meet after 7.5 hours. Now you can check your work. So if train A goes 90 miles an hour for 7.5 hours, it will have traveled 630 plus 45, or 675 miles, whereas train B, if it travels 70 miles per hour for 7.5 hours, that would be 490 plus 35, which is 525 miles, and 675 plus 525 is exactly 1,200 miles, so everything does check out. This distance would be 675, and this distance here would be 525, and the total is 1,200. So for number 6, the key was to use d equals rt and just combine like terms. Okay, next for number 7, the distance from point N to point O is 8.2. The average arithmetic mean of the lengths of MN and NO are 7.6. What's the distance from point M to point N? So here from N to O, it's 8.2. And the average of the lengths of MN and NO are 7.6. So remember, average is the total divided by the number of data. In this case, it's just 2. So the total of MN plus NO, we don't know what MN is, so we can call that X. So X plus 8.2 divided by 2 has to be the average of 7.6. So here to solve for X, you can multiply by 2 on both sides. And you get that X plus 8.2 is 15.2. So if you subtract 8.2 on both sides, you get that X is equal to 7. And that's going to be choice D. Next for number 8, for every 15 gallons of fuel that is consumed, the rocket will rise 12 miles. If 105 gallons of fuel are consumed per minute, how far will the rocket rise in 2 minutes? So if you have 105 gallons for 1 minute, in 2 minutes, you'll use double the amount of fuel, which will be 210 gallons. Now, if 15 gallons, you rise 12 miles, and you have 210 gallons, that's going to rise X miles. So here, this is your proportion. You can solve this by cross multiplying. So that 15X is equal to 12 times 210, and you want to divide by 15 on both sides. And from here, you can cross simplify. 210 and 15, they have a common factor of 15, actually. So the answer will be 12 times 14, or 168. And that's choice C. So for number 8, it's a proportion question. So you set up the proportion, make sure the units line up, as so, and then you can cross multiply and solve. Next for number 9, you want to express the following as a sum. So here you have some negatives. Just want to make sure they are all sums. So, for example, instead of rewriting 7 minus 32, you can think of this as 7 plus negative 32. Normally, when you add a negative, you simplify this by just subtracting, because when the signs are different, it turns into subtraction. But you want to unsimplify it. So you'll be adding a negative 32, adding another negative 12, and here when you subtract a negative 64, you're just adding. So this will turn into 7 plus negative 32 plus negative 12 plus 64 plus 14. And that's choice D. Next for number 10, the number of people in John's elementary school is represented by the letter E, and the number of people in John's high school is represented by the letter H. Which of the following represents the statement, the student population in John's high school was 6 times the student population in elementary school? So high school was greater, specific 6 times greater. So high school's population will be 6 times, or 6 multiplied by E. And that's choice E. So you turn the word sentence to a number sentence. Again, times means multiply. You want to multiply the smaller number, which is E in this case, by 6, and that'll be equal to the bigger number. So here's a summary for this page. Okay, next for number 16, let S be equal to the number of 5-pointed stars on the front cover of the test. The number S is the factor of 2002 minus n, where n is a whole number. What is the smallest possible value for n? So S is a factor of this number, and this has to be a whole number. Now the smallest possible value for n, you have to go through all the choices. If you want the smallest possible value, you want to start with choice A. So choice A is n equals 6. So if n is equal to 6, you have 2002 minus n, or minus 6. That's equal to 1996. So S is equal to the number of 5-pointed stars, and this number is a factor of this number. In this case, you can't actually tell because we don't really know what S is. We don't have the original image, so you can't really do this question. So you want to skip that. Okay, next for number 17, in a regular hexagon ABCDEF, the area of triangle ADF is what fraction the area of the hexagon? So you draw a regular hexagon. And you have a triangle ADF. And ADF looks like this. So you want to figure out what fraction of this entire shape is this triangle. So it helps if you cut this hexagon into 6 equal triangles. And you'll likely see that this little triangular piece fits into this one down here. So essentially you have, because you have a regular hexagon, you have 2 out of the 6 triangles completely covered. So the area is going to be 2 out of 6, or 1/3. Which is choice B. And again, you can take advantage of the symmetry here because a regular hexagon has 6 equilateral triangles, so everything is really proportional. Specifically with the shape on the bottom here, this is a rhombus that kind of got cut into fourths. Next for number 18, place the 9 integers from -4 to 4 into these 9 boxes so that the sum of the integers in any of the 2 consecutive boxes is a perfect square number. So the numbers next to each other must be a perfect square. So the perfect squares, you have 0, 1, 4, and that's it, because you can't have any, you can't make the next perfect square, which is 9, because 4 plus 3 is 7. So you can only make 0, 1, or 4. So in this case, if you start out with any of the numbers, you just want to do a guess and check. You can have, let's say, if you have a -4 here, you must have something positive to cancel that out. So you'll have to put +4 next to it, so that this would be 0. And if you have a +4, you can keep a -3 next to it, and 4 minus 3 would be +1. And if you have a -3, you can put a +3 next to that to make 0. And from +3, you can make a sum of 1 again by having -2 and a +2, and then -1, +1, and then 0. So here, this is a place you have displacement where -2 is in the middle, so that would be it. It doesn't say you can have any other way of placing this, so once you have to find a way that fits, you can just stick with that. Next, for number 19, the area of a circle is 1 over pi. What's the circumference in centimeters of the circle? So the formula for the area is pi r squared, and in this case, we want to set pi r squared to 1 over pi. And you want to solve for the radius here. So if you divide by pi on both sides, you have 1 over pi divided by pi, which is 1 over pi squared, and that's equal to r squared. And from here, you can do the square root and get that r is equal to 1 over pi. Now, once you know the radius is 1 over pi, to find the circumference, that is 2 pi r. So you will substitute in 2 times pi times 1 over pi. And 1 over pi cancels out with pi, so you just get the circumference of 2, which is choice B. The two formulas you need, pi r squared and 2 pi r. Next, for number 20, triangle ABC is a right triangle, and AD is equal to AE, and DE is equal to EB. You have two isosceles triangles in there. The measure of angle CAB is 30 degrees. What's the measure of angle CDB? So if CAB is 30 degrees, here this angle ABC is 90 degrees. That leaves 60 for the top. So once you have that, then you can start filling in these smaller triangles. Triangle ADE is isosceles. So these two opposite base angles have to be equal. Take 180 minus 30, you get 150. 150 divided by 2 is 75. So each of these will be 75 degrees. Now once you have this angle is 75, the angle next to it, angle DEB, has to be its supplement. So supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. So you have to take 180 minus 75, and you got 105. And then that means that the two opposite angles must be equal as well, because triangle DEB is also isosceles. So you have to take 180 minus 105, that's 75, and take 75 and divide by 2, and you get 37.5. So each of these will be 37.5 degrees. And to figure out the angle of CDB, that's this angle here, you have this angle is 75. This angle here is 37.5. This would be 180 minus the sum of 75 plus 37.5, which is 112.5. And when you do 180 minus 112.5, you have 67.5. So the answer is going to be choice E. So for number 20, you have to use supplementary angles, the fact that a triangle equals 180, and a whole bunch of isosceles triangles to figure out that final answer. Next, for number 21, a person's monogram is his or her 3 initials in order, the first, second, and third initial. Mr. and Mrs. Pythagoras wish to name their new baby, so that her 3-letter monogram is the alphabetical order with no letters repeated. For example, AMP or MOP. Now, if the third initial is P for Pythagoras, how many different monograms are possible? So this is your counting principle question. And specifically, you have 3 different letters, and you want to start with the restrictions. So here, the last letter, there's only one option available, the letter P. So you can't do anything about that. Now for the first letter, so for this counting principle, the first two letters can be anything from A all the way down to O. So I, J, K, L, M, N, O, and P. So M is the middle, which is the 13th letter, and 14, and O is the 15th. So you'll have anything from this pair would be anything from 15 letters, and the second letter, because you can't repeat, you only have 14 letters to pick from for the next pair. Now here, this has to be also in alphabetical order as well, so that's the next restriction. So because there's an alphabetical order, here order matters. What that means is if you pick O as one of the letters, N-O would be okay, but O-N would be incorrect because that's not alphabetical order. So because N-O is not the same as O-N, that means that half of the letters would be wrong. So when you have 15 times 14, you'll actually have to divide by 2. And you have to do 15 times 7, which is equal to 105. So that's choice A. There are 105 possibilities here, or possible pairs. Now you can also do this the long way. So if you choose A, that will go from anything from B all the way down to O. So from letters B to O, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Or 14 branches. Now if you choose B, you can't pick A anymore because that's reverse alphabetical. And you can't pick B with B, so this would be from C down to O. And this would only be 13 branches. And then if you choose C first, you can't pick A or B. So those two are wrong, and you can't pick C. So you'll have to go from D all the way down to O, which will be just 12. So that's a pattern. You have to do 14 plus 13 plus 12 plus 3, then 2, then 1. If you choose the letter N first, you can only choose O. That's the last one. So if you pair this up, there are, from 1 to 14, there are 7 pairs of 15. Because each of these would be 15. And that's the same 7 times 5 that we got. And 7 times 5 is 105. So here, you can do this via the counting principle, where you start with the restrictions, and then you come up with the different pairs. Because you can't repeat, that's 15 times 14 pairs. And then you have to divide by 2, because half these pairs will be invalid, because order matters, you can't go backwards. So that's why the answer is 15 times 5, or sorry, 15 times 7, because it's 15 times 14 divided by 2. Or you can also do this via the tree diagram, which is the long way. And once you find a pattern, it's basically 14 plus 13 plus 12, all the way down to 3 plus 2 plus 1. Next, for number 22, here I have a definition. The nth triangular number, Tn, is equal to the sum of the first n whole numbers. So the theorem states that the number b is a triangular number if and only if 8b plus 1 is a perfect square. Which one of these 5 numbers is a triangular number? So here, you want to use the theorem. You want something to be a triangular number only if 8b plus 1 is a perfect square. So that means you have to take all these numbers, multiply it by 8, and add 1, and that needs to be a perfect square. So here, if you look at all these choices and you multiply by 8, and then you have to add 1. So we have 3, 2, 2, 3, 1 times 8. And add 1, 1, that's 2, 5, 7, 8, 4, 9. Next up, you have 103, 840 times 8, and you add 1. That's going to be 830, 721. For choice C, you have 131, 641 times 8, add 1. That's 1053, 129. For choice D, you have 173, 466 times 8. And then you add 1, that's going to be 1387, 728. And finally for 204, 480 times 8, and then add 1. That's going to be 1635, 841. So then you have to test all these numbers to see if they are perfect squares. And you definitely need a calculator for this one. And I think only choice E should be the only one that is a perfect square. This is 1279 squared. So you just have to follow the rules here, and you'll definitely have to use a calculator for this one, because all the other choices you can't really tell if they're perfect squares or not, because the numbers are really large. And here's a summary for this page. Next, for number 23, on a coordinate plane, the vertices of a triangle are 3, 7, 3, 19, and 13, 1. In square units, what's the area of this triangle? So you want to draw a little graph. You have 3 and then 7. 3 and then 19. And then 13, 1. Which is all the way down here. So this triangle will be an obtuse triangle. When you have an obtuse triangle like this, you have to draw the external height, because the base and the height must be perpendicular. So the base will be from 3, 19 to 3, 7. And that's going to be a base of 12. The height will go from 13 to 3, which will be 10. So the area will be 1/2 the base, which is 12, times 10, which is 6 times 10, or 60, choice A. So remember, the area is 1/2 base times height for a triangle, but base must be perpendicular to height. Next, for number 24, x and k are real numbers. What is the sum of all the solutions for x in the equation x plus 9 in parentheses squared minus k squared is equal to 0? So when you have this quadratic, the one thing you can do is to expand x plus 9 squared in parentheses, and then you want to find the sum of all the solutions. So remember, for quadratics, the sum of the roots, you can use the equation c or negative b over a. And that only applies if you have this quadratic in standard form. So ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So this standard form of this parabola is what we want to make this equation look like. So when you expand x plus 9 squared, that's x plus 9 plus times x plus 9. So when you FOIL, that's going to be x squared plus 9x plus 9x plus 81, and then you still have that minus k squared. And the 9x's will combine. You get x squared plus 18x plus 81 minus k squared equals 0. So here you have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a is equal to 1. There's that invisible 1 there. B is equal to 18. And c is equal to 81 minus k squared. Now for the sum of the roots, that's negative b over a. The product of the roots is c over a. So we want to use the negative b over a form. So just take those two. Negative b over a is equal to the sum of the roots. And that's going to be negative of 18 divided by 1, or negative 18. So that's why the answer is choice A. We don't know what the roots are. In fact, we can't even find what the roots are. But two roots, the two answers to this quadratic will have a sum of negative 18. Next one, number 25, in quadrilateral ABCD, AC is perpendicular to BD. Therefore, ABCD must be, so you have this quadrilateral and the diagonals are perpendicular. So you can have something like a kite, or you can have something like a rhombus. So when we have a rhombus, that's a parallelogram. But it doesn't have to be a parallelogram because kites also have perpendicular diagonals, but they're not parallelograms or trapezoids even. They don't have any parallel sides. So the answer is choice E. All the choices are parallelograms. It doesn't have to be a parallelogram. A kite is not a parallelogram, but its diagonals are still perpendicular. Next, for number 26, assume that the distinct lines x plus ay equals p and x plus by equals q are not parallel. Express x in terms of a, b, p, and q. So you want x in terms of these four variables, and you can actually solve for x in only two of the variables. So when you have these two equations, you can bring all four of the variables a, p, b, and q together if you substitute in for y. So you isolate y in one of the equations. For example, you take the first equation, x plus ay equals p. You subtract x from both sides. The ay equals p minus x, and you divide by a. So you know that y is equal to p minus x over a. You'll take this and you'll substitute in for the y in the second equation. And that way you can have these four variables together. So instead of x plus by equals q, now you have x plus b times p minus x over a. That's equal to q. So here you have this denominator that you don't want, so you can multiply both sides by a. And when you distribute, you get ax plus b times p minus x, because the a will cancel out with the a in the denominator there, and that's equal to qa. And then you can distribute the b, so have ax plus bp minus bx equals qa. Now you want all the x's on one side and isolated. So from here, you can subtract bp from both sides. So you end up with ax minus bx is equal to qa minus bp. And here can factor out the x. So you just have one instance of x left with a minus b left. And that's equal to qa minus bp. And if you divide by a minus b, you have x is equal to qa minus bp over a minus b. And if you look at the choices, that's choice C. So here you have to isolate a variable and then substitute in to solve for the other one. Next, for number 27, during each hand of a card game, Siggy has a 75% probability of winning 10 points and 25% probability of losing 25 points. Starting at a score of 0, what's the probability that Ziggy will have a positive score after 4 hands? You had to round to nearest cent. So you have to do a probability tree, or just a tree diagram. And you have to branch out 4 times. So you start with 0 points. You can have 75% or 25%. Here you would gain 10. And after 25%, you'll lose 25. So that will be negative 25. You have to do this again with 4 branches. So you have another 3/4 and 1/4. Here, the 3/4, you'll gain 10, so that's 20. Here, you'll lose 25, so 10 minus 25 is negative 15. Or if you have negative 25, there's a chance you'll gain 10. Finally, you could lose another 25, which is negative 50. And then each of these will branch out 2 more times. you have 3/4 and 1/4. So each of the 3/4 you'll have to add 10. And each of the 1/4 you have to subtract 25. And then from here you have one last round, because you have 4 hands, so there will be 16 possibilities. And again, each of these you can either gain 10, that's a 3/4 probability. That's the one on the left side. So you have to add 10 to each of those. And then the other side, you'll have to subtract 25. I got a space, so I'm going to put this on the bottom. And you have -100 there. All right, and each of these you have to keep multiplying by the percentages. So you only want the ones that have a positive score. So that's the 40, 5, 5, 5, and this 5. So there aren't that many branches here. Now to figure out the branches, you have to multiply these percentages. So to get to the 40 point, that's 3/4 times 3/4 times 3/4 times 3/4. That's 3/4 to the 4th power. To get to the first 5, it's 3/4, 3/4, and 3/4, and then 1/4 here. That's 3/4 times 3/4 times 3/4 times 1/4. So for the 40, that's 3 to the 4th power, or 81, over 4 to the 4th power, which is 128. Or sorry, 256 rather. And then for this first 5, that's 27 over 256. And then for the next 5, you have 3/4, 3/4, 1/4, and then 3/4. You have to add or multiply 3/4 times 3/4 times 1/4 times 3/4. So that's another 27 over 256. And then for this 5, you have 3/4, 1/4, 3/4, and another 3/4. So that's another 27 over 256. And for the last one, you have 1/4, then 3/4, 3/4, and 3/4. And you kind of see the pattern here. You can win with the positive score if you get all positives, or you can only have at most 1 minus 25. So that -25 can show up either in the 4th position, the 3rd position, the 2nd position, or the 1st position. As long as you have 1 minus 25, you are still okay. So then you'll just have to add these probabilities together. You have 81 plus 4 times 27, and that's all over 256. So when you calculate that, 27 times 4 is 108, plus 81 is 189. and you divide it over 256, that's equal to 73.8%, which is about choice D, 74%. So for 27, you have to draw a probability tree, or you can eventually find the pattern. You can only take 1 minus 25. If you have 2 minus 25s, you won't get a positive score. So then you can either have all 3/4, which is 75% to the fourth power, or you can have 75% to the third power with a 1/4 in there. But you have 4 ways of getting that. Next, for number 28, here B is equal to P times Q squared times R to the fourth power, where P, Q, and R are distinct, so they're different, and they have to be prime. So the product AB is a perfect cube. What is a possible value for A? So if you have a perfect cube, that means that you need to have at least 3 of each factor. So B is already P, you have 2 Q's, and you have 4 R's. So the factors are you missing because you need multiples of 3 here. You need 2 more P's, you need 1 more Q, and because you have 4 R's, you need 2 more R's to make 6 R's so that you have 2 sets of 3. So that would be choice D, P squared times Q times R squared. Next, for 29, the L-shaped region is composed of congruent squares. The length of PQ is the square root of 65. What is the area in square centimeters of the L-shaped region? So here we don't know. So for this question, you know that this is a right triangle, and in this right triangle you have the hypotenuse is the square root of 65. And for this triangle, you know that you can use Pythagorean, which is that a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So in this case, the two sides would be a and b. So you know that a squared plus b squared has to be equal to the square root of 65 squared, which is just 65. So if you think about this shape, this is actually the classic setup for this Pythagorean theorem. If you think about the proof of the Pythagorean theorem, you have the square with side A, you have another square with side B, and if you add these two squares, the area will be equal to the larger square's area. Now we kind of have that. We do need 3 additional blocks over on the B side. So we move these 3 blocks from the bottom to the side. You'll actually have this 9 blocks, which is equal to b squared, and these 4 blocks equals to a squared. So when you have a squared plus b squared, that's going to be a total of 9 plus 4, or 13 blocks, or 13 squares, since these are congruent squares, and that's going to be equal to the 65. So when you have 13 blocks equal to 65, each of the blocks will have an area of just 5. So that's going to be the last area here. So you have 65 plus the 5, which is this last block. Will give you a total area of choice C, 70. So you have 10 blocks all covered up. You know that 13 blocks is equal to, or 13 blocks is 65, and you have 14 blocks in total. So that's going to be a total of 70. Next, for number 30, the repeating decimal 0.243 repeating is 0.24 with repeating 3's. It can be represented as a fraction a over b in lowest terms. What does the sum of a plus b equal? So for this type of repeating decimal question, you have to rewrite this using place values. So 0.243 2, 4, 3 repeating means that you have 2 tenths plus 4 hundredths plus 3 thousandths and then 3 10,000ths and so on and so forth. So the first two parts, these two numbers, they're kind of set in stone. But every number after that, these would actually be a repeating pattern called a geometric sequence. And in this geometric sequence, you have this pattern where the first term is 3 over 1,000. And then the pattern, the common ratio that you're multiplying by, because in a geometric sequence, you keep multiply by a common ratio. And we call that ratio, that constant, r. The common ratio of r is going to be equal to 1/10, because each time you go to the next number, you multiply by 1/10. So when you have a geometric sequence, you can actually find the sum of this converging sequence if r is between 0 and 1, which it is in this case, is going to be the sum, s, will be a over 1 minus r. So that means that the a term, the first term, is 3 over 1,000. And if you divide it by 1 minus 1/10, that's going to be 3 over 1,000 divided by 9/10. And from here you can do a keep change flip, because you have 3 over 1,000 divided by 9/10. When you KCF, that's going to be 3 over 1,000 times 10 over 9. And here the 0 and the 3's will cancel out, and that will give you 1 over 300. So this will be the sum of all these 3's onto infinity. There'll be a converging sum. And it'll converge to 1 over 300. So you'll be adding 2 over 10 plus 4 over 100 plus 1 over 300. And when you add everything together, you want to use the LCD of 300. So that's going to be 60 over 300 plus 12 over 300 plus 1 over 300, or 73 over 300. So that's going to be a over b. So a over b will be 73 over 300, and when you do a plus b, that's going to be 73 plus 300, or choice E, 373. So that's how you can use a geometric sequence. With the first term is a, common ratio is 1 over 10, to find the sum of a geometric sequence, and then you can just add it to the other parts of this decimal. So that's how you use a geometric sequence to solve or to change a repeating decimal into a fraction. And keep in mind that all repeating decimals can be turned into a fraction, because all repeating decimals, just like fractions, are rational. So if they're rational, that means that a decimal is terminating or repeats, and that you can express it as a fraction. And this is the reason why. So here's a summary for this last page. Thank you everyone for joining me today. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. All right, bye everyone.